Hello and welcome to another edition of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. I'm your host, Peter, and I am still here. And tonight, it is my pleasure to give you part 2 of my discussion with Jack from Soft Riot in celebration of the new record entitled simply No. Period. Is it just me, or does this album have a hint of early Skinny Puppy interwoven through its DNA? I hate to do that to Jack. I hate to do that to any band, but every time I listen to it, I get something new out of this record, and I think that speaks to the quality of the work. If I may, I'd like to quickly thank Tim and Sweet Cheetah and Tiana in Word for Word Interpretation for helping to keep the lights on and the show afloat. Everyone else as well, all of my listeners. If you really want to support me, you can donate money, you can do all that fun stuff, and it's welcome, but it's not what I prefer. But what I prefer is you like, rate, subscribe, listen wherever you listen to podcasts. Give me a shout. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram. Share my stuff. Let your friends know that you dig the show, and it will help our existence tremendously. On with the show. As I said, this is part 2. Jack and I sat for a good long while and really just felt each other out and had a great time, and I think that's reflected in the quality of this conversation. Without further ado, I give to you, Jack, Soft Riot, on the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. This episode of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast has been brought to you by our sponsors at Sweet Cheetah Publicity. Sweet Cheetah is a PR collective that values people over profit. They put a different spin on public relations by working primarily with friends and using all profits to aid charitable organizations. With a roster that includes Jawbox, The New Amsterdams, Brainiac, Get Some, Funeral Date, Damien Dunn, and many more artists, record labels, and podcasts. Sweet Cheetah. That's a great PR cohort. You can find them on social media by simply searching Sweet Cheetah PR, and they'll be there. He's been Tim. I've been Peter, and Sweet Cheetah has been beautiful.
Like as I was going back to like the sort of internet genres and people getting, you can for instance, like minimal synth, that wasn't a thing until like the mid 2000s when like probably obviously some like Veronica Vasca minimal wave kind of maybe was partly responsible for coining the term, but prior to that, like I'd even met some of these people that played in bands in the 80s from that time period, like that would be considered minimal synth, and like there wasn't even a fucking thing. It was just like we were people that liked synth music but couldn't afford the fucking expensive 30 grand fucking Fairlight at the time. They were just like, their synths were like maybe 2 or 3 years old, or they like bought a kit. They probably had a 4-track or a tiny studio. It's not like they were like, we're going to make this minimal synth aesthetic. They were just trying to write.
I only have a Tascam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They only had like a synth pop, and their friend has like a reel-to-reel, and that's how they recorded it. So there wasn't even a genre, but 20 years or 30 years removed from that, they're looking back on it and like, oh, I'm seeing how these bands sound kind of similar, but they weren't connected in any way whatsoever.
So in taking that into consideration, in the future, there could quite conceivably be something like what one would call like Fostex core, where it's like just so minimalistic that like it could only be pulled off if you have a Fostex cassette
Those things have massive resale value.
I own two of them.
I have a friend that
and an 8-track.
moved from Bradford in the UK to Victoria a couple years ago, and he's telling me that he sold his, I think it was a Tascam for like 900 quid to some younger guy that was trying to really get that sort of lo-fi sort of aesthetic. And I found a Yamaha 4-track recorder in a fucking recycling bin. I mean, I haven't fixed it yet. It's the tape head's broken on. I have a friend here that's a bit of a whiz with that sort of stuff, so I might get it fixed at some point. But yeah,
well, that was always the boon for me because I know how to fix that sort of thing. That's been very handy
to have. Yeah,
but you know, conceivably, all that is old becomes new again. But what I find really fascinating about your trajectory specifically is it's not necessarily you taking something that is old and making it new again. You're taking what is you and making it known now. And I think that's like the prescient point here. There's no real like hearkening back I
think it's partially too, like, I've been doing music with that general aesthetic since the late 90s, which is 2.5 times longer than the decade that everybody references.
Yeah.
I kind of take aesthetics and stuff I like and use that as a vehicle for my own ideas. And like, second, I mean, where was I going with this? I think I had this all mapped out of my head. I was going to go with it. But I think it's also too, I take inspiration from like tons of other stuff that's not music. Like sometimes it's like, especially when I do the more ambient stuff, a lot of it's just like concepts, like math or what happens if I do this melody for 2 minutes and then do the same melody for 2 minutes a minute later? You know, it's just like weird stuff like that. Or like, what happens if I get these two unrelated chords and then that's the transition verse and I have to find what's called the pivot point, which is like the common note between them. I get into weird shit like that. I mean, my sort of musical theory and notation is pretty much limited to what I was executing in concert band in grade 10 or grade 8 and 9, but it still sticks with you. I know if someone says, oh, play like an A diminished, I'll know what the fuck that is, right? Whereas
a depleted fifth or whatever, but the way you're approaching it is very Dada. You know, you're painting right now at this point.
Oh yeah, that's actually notes. A good thing because I think that a lot. It's like there's a lot of counterpoint when I'm writing. Like I'll be like, this is gonna sound like hippy dippy, but this tone's kind of like purple over here.
Let's go like synesthesia, so I get it.
Let's do this airy pastel sound in this gap that's more of a square wave to complement that. I do a lot of stuff like that.
Well, that's called synesthesia. You realize that, right?
Oh yeah. I was just using those descriptors as an example. I don't necessarily think that, but taking the art analogy there, it's just like kind of constructing a piece of art rather than like writing music. I mean, I do miss playing in bands. Like obviously working solo for so long, there's pros and cons to that. Like I have periods from like I'm just dying to get into a rehearsal space and just fucking bash shit out at top volume, and everybody's contributing ideas, and it's like this democratic thing. But I also like with this project, like this particular mindset of like constructing something is kind of what I used to execute how I write. So
it's almost like power electronics in that way. It's like collage based, but only insofar as like the idea or the impetus behind the song itself. That's where the collage takes place, you know, in the interior, and then you execute. You know, it's an interesting end product for me, and I can almost sort of take that journey with you where this is concerned, this record is concerned, because it feels very much like a fever dream in a way.
Yeah, and I was like, there's other stuff in there, like I purposefully reuse lyrics and
Kubrickian again.
And like little phrases of the music. For me, it's kind of like a little chuckle when I'm writing. No one's gonna fucking pick this shit.
No, but the callbacks, the callbacks are kind of what makes it creepy.
Yeah.
Like Kubrick.
Like deja vu. Like, where have I fucking
Yeah.
heard that before? Oh, that was in the last song, dude.
like when you keep
That's
seeing
why you know recognizing it.
when you keep seeing the baking powder in the background of The Shining when they're in the kitchen, you know, like no matter where you look, there's that Indian head can of baking powder. Like these callbacks make it familiar yet alien, and that duality is, I think, what you harness very well here.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously there's like a lot of writing. What's that, Marshall McLuhan and all those kind of Wilson Bryan Key, like about this subliminal advertising. I haven't read that stuff in years, but I mean, maybe there's a bit of that in there with not necessarily trying to manipulate a listener. It's just there. It's there for like less sinister reasons, far less. It's just me just having a laugh.
Well, it's an in-joke rather than
it's totally my own private in-joke with myself.
So, like, what you said that, like, you know, you've already written for, or actually know where the next record is headed. What do you think? What would the descriptor be for that next step?
Well, I've always been trying to write like a more minimal record, but I don't mean like minimal as in a genre. I mean minimal as in like less going on. But the last couple records, I start trying to do it, and then I chicken out for some reason. And I'm just like, I can't do it now. And I think part of it is like with electronic music, it's very easy for minimal compositions to sound very clinical.
Yeah.
And I don't want that. So I've kind of been thinking of techniques I can do that I can allow doing minimal composition without it sounding sterile, and not necessarily relying on tons of effects either. So I might try stuff with like amping and stuff like that, getting some ambiance going somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's also from a logistical standpoint, I kind of want slightly less to do on stage. There's some songs and some of the records where it's like I could play that one song, but it's like a fucking pain in the ass. it's like your hands are moving around like this, and like it keeps changing all the time. It's like I want to like maybe pull back the sort of like circus routine a bit, and maybe allow myself a little bit of fun to move around a bit more, and there's a little bit of like looseness.
Yeah, because the more involved it gets, and the more epic and mathy things can become. We understand what mathy means. To the listener, math rock from anyone from Dillinger Escape Plan to Don Caballero, to go to kind of like eliminate that a little bit, draw back and allow.
I don't mean it in a way like I'm going to dumb it down or like
no, give it
like,
room to breathe.
I know it's hard to explain. I know where it is in my brain, and I know kind of sounds I want to try. It's just like a little bit of like. There's something a little bit more to latch onto, and as I say, I can kind of free to not be feeling like I'm like trying to like launch a fucking satellite into space every time I play a song, you know?
Yeah, just get out of your own way a little bit. Really.
Yeah, exactly. So then just like, because like previous records, I'll start at minimal, and it's like, oh, I'm just gonna add this here and this here, and like until it gets quite rather dense, even though the music is still at some degree minimal, but I think. Yeah, just a little less going on. And maybe making the tempo slightly slower. And just like, I kind of want songs that even go like maybe like 100 to 110 BPM, because sometimes that's kind of a cool, kind of stompy kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, you know, minimal synths like 140, 150, and EBM, it kind of is like between 114 and 120. So maybe some songs that are it's slightly slower, but have actually still retained the sort of energy and the power a bit.
The hardcore breakdown of it all.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a China cymbal and start. And one of those piccolo snares that was all the rage at the time.
Oh, Snapcase piccolo snare.
I remember like that was like a massive trend back then. Even like local bands, like I got a piccolo snare. It's like fucking hell, man.
Yeah, like the snare has no bottom. It's just.
There's a lot of that. Yeah, the China was quite popular. I'm trying to remember other tropes of the time, but nothing's really coming to mind right now.
The thing I think when I mentioned Snapcase, though, I'm not to demean them because I think they did it really, really well.
I actually quite liked them when they came out.
Yes.
All that kind of like New York sort of like, I forget what label they were on. Was it
Victory?
Victory. It was one of the big majors of hardcore. Victory, Revelation, etc.
Yeah,
no, I thought that record was cool, especially like the use of harmonics and some of the guitar stuff was quite interesting.
Especially that second record. The first one was, very much a Krishnacore record, but the second one, when they got into the pinch harmonics and, like they got less tough guy and a lot more. They had such style. Like when the band Turnstile now is very much a callback to Snapcase, and Snapcase was a very big callback to Quickness era Bad Brains. They had that same bounce, but Snapcase, with the harmonics and the piccolo snare and the riding that China, they became almost a stylistic revolution within the confines of what had been ruled primarily by thrashy and stompy New York hardcore.
I mean, there's a few artists pushing the envelope. I mean, probably on the West Coast, it might have been like a band like Unbroken or something.
Unbroken, yes.
Yeah, because they were like still within, but they're kind of playing on that sort of more confessional, emotional sort of subject matter.
And Dead Guy and Rorschach were.
Yeah, I remember Rorschach.
They were a big. They were phenomenal and a big part of that shift too. But had that sort of thing not occurred, Radio Berlin would not have occurred because.
Well, like the one guitarist from Rorschach was in that band Beautiful Skin on GSL, and that was a completely different band. Like kind of like Wire, Cabaret Voltaire kind of stuff.
Very much so. Yeah. And incidentally, a gateway drug for a lot of people in our scene into things that they like. I had already been into, but they wouldn't necessarily have dipped their
probably
feet
a lot of people like there was a lot of hardcore bands like Swing Kids did cover Warsaw.
Yeah,
Angel Hair did a cover Stigmata Martyr, and that's arguably how I got into Bauhaus, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I knew about who they were before, but then I was kind of like, obviously these guys are worth listening to because Angel Hair has covered them.
Well, Angel Hair was one of those, like, they were cult, like, gods almost. Angel Hair was like Swing Kids definitely were, Unbroken definitely were. It's funny to me how these bands that we thought were revolutionary, and they truly were really calling back to bands that in their own eras were largely forgotten.
Oh yeah, of course. Like, I mean, probably a lot of cult touch points for these bands were like the fact that people that generation grew up with A, punk, B, metal, and C, like, bands like The Cure and Killing Joke and all that stuff. So it was, you're getting your teens and in this sort of contemporary scene, and, you might want to explore a bit. So you're like, I know, speaking of my Angel Hair, like I know Sonny is a massive Echo and the Bunnymen fan. I know this because he contacted me 10 years ago. He's like, Jack, I need you to do a favor for me. And I was like, what? It's like, I need you to buy this rare Will Sargent 7-inch because they won't ship to the US. I was like, okay, I'll sort that out for you. So.
You know what though? If you really think about it, these tastes that seem so very disparate work so well together, and that's why our thing constantly shifts but self-perpetuates and still pays tribute to its roots, because it's still it moves forward in a very loving and almost familial way.
Of course, yeah.
You know, and that's why I've never like fully like I'm pushing 50.
Mm-hmm.
I still I have no misgivings about saying I'm a hardcore kid. That's where I'm from. That's culturally what I am, and that is emotionally something I will never slough off because
No, me neither. I mean, I still feel the same way a bit. Obviously, as we've touched on earlier in this conversation, like being in the UK, there isn't really that. However, having said that, in Glasgow, there's like a kind of a younger generation that's taking cue from these sort of bands. So even though my sort of ties to that scene out there, I kind of get a little window as to what's happening with that scene locally, because I've seen a lot of interesting kind of hardcore bands of kids that might be 10, maybe 15 years younger than me. And it's kind of interesting to see where they're taking it, really. I mean,
yeah,
and then you like, even when I was living in Sheffield briefly for 2 years, and there was like a venue there called the Lug Hole, and I went to a number of shows there. It was like punk bands, local punk bands. It's like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, I mean, I'm not like so attached to that anymore because the music I'm doing is different, but it's nice and refreshing to go and see what people are doing with a genre that I grew up with. So, yeah.
And when you really think about it too, who I was 30 years ago in the confines of the punk scene, I was very, I hate to say this, but very much gatekeepy and dogmatic in my love for the thing. And even bands getting signed to major record labels, we almost wrote them off, right?
Oh yeah, that was like such a big thing back then.
You sold out. Sick of It All got a pass because they were like godfathers. Same with Agnostic Front being on Columbia Records, but they're Agnostic Front. But now, unless you're one of those old heads who like, you know, just lost themselves to the drink or what have you. Bands like Turnstile come up and they're huge and they're like almost platinum selling, and you're like, fuck yeah. There's a hardcore band that is like a top 40 band. Yes.
There's a lot of weird records like from that time. Like, obviously, not. I won't say that this record's particularly weird, but like, you know, picking up a band like Quicksand, you know, like
I just took it down. Slips right behind me over here somewhere.
Slipped off your shelf.
Yeah, it did.
But I think that there's also a lot of weird random signings. I think for me, the weirdest signing of the 90s, and I mean it's a good way, is that Pony Express record by Shudder to Think.
Shudder to Think were fucking.
I love that record, and you listen to it, and it's like it's just like this. It's such a weird record. Like on Epic.
There's Slip.
Oh, there you go.
But yeah, Shudder to Think. What was so incredible about them was they were, you know, Revolution Summer Discord band, but very progressive and almost loungy, and they had a swagger and style like they were the precursor to like when the guys from Gorilla Biscuits became the band Civ.
Yeah, I saw Civ at Warped Tour. Like,
the first Warped Tour.
I wasn't there to see them. I was actually there to see Quicksand and Seaweed. But
Seaweed.
By proxy.
Oh, yeah. But you know what I mean? Like they made it cool to be like well dressed and a little mod again, like that. Paul Weller Mach 2.
Yeah, totally, for sure. But like that Shudder to Think record is just like, especially that hit licker, the last verse when they cut out an eighth note on each repetition is like, you're like, what the?
You fucking band geeks, why are you doing this to me? But it like that's what made it such an open playing field for creativity.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For as dogmatic as I had just said, it could be within the confines of that scene. You give it 1995, 96, and it became very open-minded and, you know, a hotbed of bands like Hum, Quicksand, Seaweed, Jawbox, and it made so much sense to me what Radio Berlin was in that time period, and your progression going forward with Soft Riot and to where you are now. Maybe to someone who isn't really schooled and that music history maybe they wouldn't get that.
Well, it's kind of weird because, like, I mean, nowadays the music scene I kind of interact with is this sort of European underground synth scene, and there's a lot of familiarity with how it all functions and the sort of how everyone's connected. That reminds me of this scene I grew up with in the 90s, except it's like obviously younger kids. Well, there's a lot of people that are older in it. I've go to some festivals or play festivals, and there's people that are well in their 60s that are out still doing, like, just stoked to see some music. But there's a lot of familiarity with how things function in terms of, oh, you want to play this city, talk to this guy, or, you know, like, he does this night, or similar to back then, you know, like everybody kind of got their contacts off people they knew. So it's kind of refreshing that still exists. I mean, it obviously with punk, it still exists for sure. I mean, I think that's just like, once that got rolling, it'll never stop. But, you know, just the fact that I'm doing more electronic music and that sort of DIY sort of like interconnectivity still there.
Yeah. The connective tissue still exists.
Exactly, for sure.
So, like, in you know, kind of like confluence to all of that, what's moving the needle for you musically right now?
I mean, like, what am I listening to?
Yeah, what are you listening to? What do you think? What do you find inspiring?
It kind of changes. Like I always, some people are like, what are your favorite records? And I'm like, oh, that changes every day. Like, I get like fixated on weird little things. Like lately, I've been I bought like I try to make a point of going to like buy records locally, like maybe once a month or so. Like, there's a good record store here called Mono. I bought a John Fox and the Mass record, which is one of his newer projects, and I also bought a double 12-inch of Ennio Morricone's like Giallo soundtracks.
Oh, I have that. I have the exact one you're talking about. Yes.
I was like, oh, this will be nice music to read to, and it's like dong 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 dong.
Yes.
I'm feeling like really tense.
That was a record store day release. I have it. Yeah.
Then I actually listen to tons of sort of more ambient music, and if only for the reason that like I kind of put on when I go into sleep. So if you know, if I tracked what music I was listening to all the time, it'd probably be like 6 hours of like just like, you know, like Tangerine or something, like Steve Roach or something like that.
I love Steve Roach. I know Steve Roach. I love Steve Roach. Yes. Wow. I was on the street team for Project Records.
Okay, right.
The band Lycia, Mike and Tara are two of my best friends in the entire world.
Okay.
Lycia is one of my all-time favorite bands in my top 10. Mm-hmm. They really harnessed a moment. Steve Roach did. Pat from Thanatos, like that whole group of people who were on Project Records back then. Mm-hmm. Very creative, very not goth for having been associated with the goth scene or the dark wave scene. Mm-hmm. Almost a post-punk psychedelia was going on there, and Steve Roach was very good at that. Like, incredibly good at that
stuff. Like, it's just like this sort of like I was thinking the other night, it's like a cyclical churning of sounds.
Yeah.
And like it's melodic but completely atonal at the same time.
Especially like when like Steve had Vidna Obmana. I feel terrible that I'd forgotten how to pronounce that. But like, he went from that to doing it under his own name, and you know, this is a classically trained musician who decided to go for more, if not atonal, certainly freeform, tones and churning and almost power electronics
I'm just thinking about. I just laughing there because I thought about Steve Roach, the radio edit. How can we cut the song? It's like an hour and a half down to 3 minutes. What's the catchy bit? Where's the chorus? You got to grab the listener right away.
Yeah. We need. There's got to be a hook to this.
Yeah. But it's just this shit for an hour and a half. What are you talking about?
Greatest hits on Columbia Records. It's a single, and it's
like
2 minutes and 10 seconds.
Yeah. Greatest hits, like 12 CDs, one song per CD.
It's like a Lustmord greatest hits.
No, God. Yeah, I always thought about that. I think I probably had this joke with someone before. Like, actually, some other stuff. I really like another stuff I would listen to. Is like a lot of the solo stuff by Bruce Gilbert from the early '80s, like that, like The Shining Man, and what's the one that was before that? Looks like You Work for Me, I Work. I forget the name of that track. I used to love that track in like my early 20s. Like this weird sort of like sound collage kind of drone stuff. I think after Wire originally broke up, they were just like, fuck this. We're going to do like Bruce Gilbert and Graham Lewis were like, just make some weird shit.
It's very inspiring to me because in the early 90s, while I was making music in hardcore bands, I was also doing power electronics, and I still do. And I love that. It's the most draining music to make on a psychic level, because
I can imagine, just like, especially just having to go back and listen to stuff like objectively from a technical viewpoint. Like, I think I need a little more 20 hertz in that.
Well, I don't know if I needed that much Boss Metal Zone pedal on the microphone while I was going. But I find it so incredibly cathartic to make. In the moment, it is incredibly cathartic, but also by the time you're done, it's usually around like 9:30, 10 o'clock the next morning, and you're covered in this like sheen of night sweat because you haven't slept yet, and you on your umpteenth cup of coffee, and you're on your Fostex. And you're done pausing and record, and the tape's probably stretched out this far, and you couldn't recreate it if you wanted to had it not been on a cassette.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You get into this zone that no narcotic could possibly double for you.
Yeah, well, music, when you're on a roll with it, the time just explodes. I've done that before. We're like, I'm just gonna, mess around for like an hour. Next thing I was like 6 hours later. You're like, what the fuck? But you snowball with that idea, regardless of what genre of music you're doing. You're like, oh, now I know where to take this, and you're gonna like, no, I suddenly have written an album. What the hell, I mean, like for me, like some songs some of them come super fast. Like I mean, like fuck, I've done that in like 2 days, 3 days. But some of them, I'll get up to a certain point, and then I have this impasse moment that is usually broken by something totally unrelated. Like looking at a sign, G&J Carpets, fuck. That's how I'm going to take the song forward. But yeah, usually these things are broken by like by something that's completely unrelated, or I might be like some other media triggers it. Like I might be watching a movie or something, and like there might be some mood or tone within that film, or maybe a sound effect, or like maybe even some of the soundtrack, even though it might be totally stylistically different. I'll be like, that's how I'm gonna get past this gap in the song.
To me, that sounds like something that from Naked City, John Zorn.
Yeah, John Zorn.
What John Zorn would do, because John's he would almost pick the exact opposite of what would make sense. But when you listen, what he does is the personification of, in my opinion, what hard bop jazz would have become had, Coltrane lived and continued, or Coltrane had he not devolved into what he did. Which, not to take away anything from any of them, but John Zorn was a logical conclusion to that. But to me, it seems like that's a big hallmark for you as well.
Like taking things to a logical conclusion, or
No. To take things to an extreme that, in retrospect, seems like the logical conclusion, but in the time, most people wouldn't get.
I've taken some really bizarre directions with songs that I would not really think of when I was starting it.
Yeah, like, not to be on the nose, but like giant steps.
You know
what I mean? Like,
oh, for sure. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, like, as I said, like this record, like sometimes like I have to really try something different. Like there's a 4th track on the record, Shouldering. That song was stuck. I was like stuck on this idea that it was gonna be one part at the beginning and one part at the end. Like songs usually go A, B, C, A, verse B, chorus, verse A. I was like, I just want one part and it dramatically shifts to this last part, and they're going to connect by the fact that the beginnings, there's the same root note, but the beginning's major and it goes to a minor chord thing. The second half came really fast, and then the first half of the song, I was just fucking couldn't figure it out for months. I wanted to be more like less structured, but it just like sounded like was like kind of like swimming in like fucking quicksand. It's like, this ain't working.
That's what I dig, though, because it's not Beach Boys pop as much as I love the Beach Boys.
They're a great band for sure. That's crazy studio techniques on those. I was actually reading about that Carol Kay, that bass player. She did all the hit songs with them. She had banged out apparently thousands of tracks.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But your approach was never like, okay, here's the hook, here's the the structure. To me, it always seemed like you were actually like the cartographer of a different path to maybe the same end as something that like a pop songwriter would do. But,
yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, I like everybody else, like I like listening to a lot of pop music, but I always feel kind of dirty when I try to emulate how people think they need to write a pop song to get, like, it's like, I want to write a hit.
Well, that's why, like, you're more Shudder to Think and less Jimmy World, and not to take anything away from Clarity.
No, I know that
Jimmy World, sense. But like that's why you didn't arrive at that sort of point where you're just making like sugary indie rock that girls can wring their panties out to. It had more to do with like the guy in the corner who was trying to make 1 + 1 = 6. You know what I mean? Like it was.
Well, yeah, like person. I mean, for music, there's always been like that for me. It's always been like a sort of a creative sort of educational experience where you're learning new ideas not only from yourself but also those you interact with.
Yeah,
like a lot of probably what I do now, even on my own, is probably informed by a lot of people I've interacted with musically and have had like conversations with, and like kind of you're talking about these nuances in music, like this obviously these kind of conversations come quite a bit when you're in a band and kind of practically executing these ideas, because then you get like a sense of where your bandmate's coming from. Yeah. Obviously, and I still have a lot of conversations here with friends in Glasgow where we can go down some interesting wormholes with like details about music or theory of like pop or experimental music that's takes a different angle and is entertaining to talk about, right? So yeah.
But to me, there was never a point with your musical career that smacked of stagnation or pandering.
No, I'm super lucky in that way. Like, you know, maybe I haven't had really that kind of success with it, but I think always whenever I just think back to it, it's like, at least I'm fucking still got some ideas I'm really excited to try out. And
Yeah.
I'm not in a situation where I'm like, well, my mortgage is up next month, so you know,
Time to turn out this.
time to write that hit record number 2.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, when I was a teenager, I knew, probably because the music I was listening to was so fucking noisy, I never really considered like music as a career. That's why I got into graphic design. And you know, like as I said, I'm just still like, wow, I'm still coming up with ideas and I can't stop. So obviously there's something going on there, and just keep pushing it, even if it's a scale it back to some degree when I'm older and I'm not really interested in like slogging it out on like people's floors. I'll still be doing music in some way. So,
but the thing that I think the point I want to paint to anyone listening who may not have come from the same scene that we did, the fact that you know, we go out and we make these records that may seem intentionally non-marketable is not self-flagellation or self-defeating. It has more to do with...
I don't see it that way at all.
We're seeking, right? We're trying to find something. We're trying to express something that's inexpressible, that's intangible yet fully... You know, it's there. It's in front of us. Well, we can't slough it off. So we have to put it some fucking where. I think that's kind of like really the point of Soft Riot is like, where am I going to put this if I don't put it here for you to listen to, for someone else to hear, so I could communicate, so I could have some conduit to kind of get this out of here and out there.
No,
so
exactly. And it's like, you know, it's more common musical aspects like emotion, but it's also like ideas and thought processes, like, and just, you know, bringing in a lot of different elements and then, you know, kind of fashioning into a song. Some of them are more quote unquote pop than others, but you know, yeah, it's just, it comes to, I think it was like that movie, documentary Instrument Fugazi, and you know, when they're interviewing all the people and they're like, I like Fugazi because they're easy to mosh to or whatever.
yeah.
But there's the one guy that's like, it's about, you know, music and ideas, and that kind of hits the nail on the head a little bit of where I'm coming with it. So,
well, to me, it's also a celebration of the act of realizing ideas.
Oh yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I actually like that.
And that's how I felt about Radio Berlin. That's how I definitely feel about this. This new record, though, specifically, really, I think, cuts through a different cloth, bearing that in mind, because thematically it's not as intentional, but it's certainly more biting.
No, I think that's a good way of putting it. It's kind of interesting because when you're in a solo artist, it's often easy to just be in such an internal, self-facilitating creative bubble that you're not getting any outside sort of observations about what you're doing. So it's interesting hearing come from you and people that I know. It's like,
you didn't get up your own ass. You didn't get up your own ass. And I think that's a big fucking deal. In something as insular as a quote unquote solo project.
No, it's very easy to, you know, kind of go in a sort of a psychic vortex or whatever you call it, you know, like it's just like, I made my own little world and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there obviously is that with what I'm doing, but, you know.
Yeah, but
I'm also very aware of a feeling of like, like connection with other people as well. So I want it to connect with people despite its weirdness, for lack of a better description.
So I think we've come to the part of the show where, like, I only have one pre-prepared question.
No, I was looking at the time. I was like, wow, we fucking blasted through 2 hours. Because when I got up, I was like, what am I going to say? Like rubbing my eyes.
we got, this is, it feels like about 45 minutes to me.
Yeah, I know. I was like,
I'm sorry if I'm beating you to death.
No, it's totally, I've had a fun time. This has been rad. It's been good.
And I'm not trying to conclude per se, but I only have one pre-prepared question, and if you've listened to any of my shows in their entirety, I always come to this point in the show where I ask this question.
I have listened to a number of the shows, and I think I might know where you're going with this, but I might be completely wrong at the same time.
Okay. I ask this because I believe the answer to this specific question gives me a very distinct insight into the psyche of the person I'm speaking to. Mm-hmm. And fear is, in all honesty, the greatest driver of all ego. Mm-hmm. What is it that terrifies you on the most existential level of your being?
I think about this a lot. I think it might be this sort of like, we're in a civilization where we connect and have certain ways we interact with each other and civilities, and just this whole idea that this could collapse at any time due to changes in our environment or war, or I think this whole concept's been exemplified most by like zombie movies where everything collapses and everybody's suddenly eating each other, taking advantage of each other. I think that thing frightens me the most in the existential levels, this sort of collapse of civility and just regressing to like primal selfish nature, where people just have no want to help out for each other anymore. It's just like, just it's me or you, and that's what it boils down to. I think obviously there's other things, but I think for me those might be more personal things about I hope I don't get a debilitating illness or whatever. But that's not so much existential. That's more personal. But I think that's my main fear, is just like I think about these things like, we have this thing where, we supply chains, and we go to shows and stuff, and then we're all can communicate with each other, and then all of a sudden things collapse due to like a massive event, and we're just like people that maybe are the most greedy and powerful just kind of take advantage of it, and everybody kind of, this whole veneer disappears, I guess.
Yeah, because in all honesty, we're really and truly within a hair's breadth of that at all times.
Oh yeah, it's always there. Like that midnight clock keeps getting a bit closer or whatever. So.
We're children of the Cold War, you and I.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We're only like 2.5 years apart. Mm-hmm. We grew up with right before Glasnost and Gorbachev. There was always that imminent threat of nuclear holocaust via Russia, mm-hmm. and movies like Red Dawn being a major part of the cultural zeitgeist, as it were, until the angels of Gorbachev's better nature came through and he played ball with that piece of garbage Reagan, and mm-hmm. Things kind of got cool for a long time, mm-hmm. but the resentments were always boiling over a little bit, and it's not necessarily all on them. We as the evil empire obviously will eventually reap what we sow, and that's a big fear of mine as well, because I didn't choose to be born here. I'm just here.
Well, that's the same case with people in any country. Like,
right,
we tend, like, there's a common tendency to vilify people in Russia, but I've been there before.
I've been there too.
Some of the nicest people I've met, actually.
Yeah.
And, and they're not like sitting there with a big Putin flag or whatever.
Mm-mm.
Like there's the thing I find with traveling for music is that you find there's a lot of common bonds regardless of what country you're from and what language you speak, and so
And you'll find like 90 to 95% of people all want the same exact thing, which is their families to be okay, to be able to pay their bills and feed everybody.
Yeah.
And like they kind of get brainwashed by, whatever media and whatever the culture is doing around them at that point. But if you get down to the kernel of what people fear and what people want, they don't want ill for the people they love, and they don't want to die too young, and they don't want war.
Yeah. I mean, I've yet to find someone that thinks completely the opposite of that. I don't know what that person be like.
No, because we wouldn't associate with them if we found them and identify.
We have very different views, but we're still friends.
No, there. I have a very fine line, and that's where I draw it. Yeah, but having been around the Eastern Bloc, and I went on a soul-searching mission in the 90s where I went to Ireland to meet the Irish sides of my family, which both of my parents are half Irish. And I went to Poland to meet the Polish side of my family. My last name's Tansky. I'm obviously Polish. I grew up speaking the language. So when I'd gotten to Poland specifically and seeing, the wreckage that still existed in Warsaw and the fear of Russia still in Poland specifically. In the 90s, it still kind of rang true because I still was hanging on to 80s Cold War.
Like a lot of those countries kind of transformed at the same time. Like I actually read an interesting book a couple years ago about it was featured like about 8 or 10 stories of different people who had grown up in the East Germany. And like their reflections on their time growing up there. And some of them, people had a more of a favorable memory of it because obviously things were supplied for by the state and you didn't have to worry about a job because everything was just like, you're working here, your food's sort of blah, blah, blah. But then obviously on the other hand, you have people that had an absolutely horrific time because they were gay or wanted to do something that the state wouldn't allow you to do,
or like, der Juden.
Yeah, exactly. So like, there's one story about someone that had fallen in love with someone in West Germany, and it was basically sneaking across the border to be with him, right?
Yeah,
and then obviously
get over the wall.
Yeah, exactly. And then obviously with like the reunification, like the West Germany went to town and sort of cleaned up discount sale, like all the East German kind of corporations and stuff. So a lot of people, I mean, I have like 2 friends of mine, they're married. One of them's from East Germany and his husband is from West Germany, and they kind of have like this different sort of memory of growing up.
Yeah.
And that's a common story because I have a lot of friends in Germany that are my age or a bit younger, maybe a bit older, and it's kind of sometimes these things come into conversation about like how they'd, I was living in East Germany and then we left because my dad somehow managed to get out and get a job in like Munich or something.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting when you kind of find out about these things, and obviously when you're traveling for music or otherwise and you meet people, you kind of hear more stories from the actual people that were there rather than through like a filter or whatever. So,
and I think when we become more worldly via traveling, especially through the microcosm of a music scene, we really find that we're really truly not that dissimilar. When you get into these situations where you're speaking to people on the same level, you're on a level playing field. There's no classism coming in to the equation. You're just like human experience upon human experience, and you really listen without interjecting or even trying to feign empathy. And you just listen to a person's story. You find out that sadly these struggles and these horrible things that happen to other people in countries that are not, in Canada or the United States, North America. Man, like, we had it so simple.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like so
I always think
simple.
about that every day. That's probably one reason even though relative to myself, I might have stressful times or things that I don't think are going well for me, and I'm like, well, at least I'm still fucking alive, and I'm not like, I've actually probably lived in probably like one of the better situations one could be in comparative to the rest of the world. So there's nothing really to complain about, and it kind of shifts stuff into perspective. And obviously there's a more cosmic viewpoint of like, well, I'm just like a speck in
We're all
billions of galaxies and no one fucking cares. What do you mean this latte doesn't come with caramel?
Oh my God. So let's kind of put a fine point on the album No. If you were to encounter someone who is a relative stranger to your musical output, and you were taxed with the question, as we've all been as musicians, well, what kind of music are you playing? What's it like? How would you respond to this person who is like mostly ignorant to your scene or output?
I'm a bit cheeky nowadays. Some people I just go, it's electronic pop music. Oh, just like I'm a beat combo playing electronic pop music.
And they're envisioning like Fatboy Slim or Moby.
Like, obviously when I say that, sometimes the conversation will then move on to like, what do you like to listen to? And then I'll kind of rattle off a very disassociated set of bands. And then that kind of bursts the bubble of what they were expecting electronic pop music to be. But no, I like that. It's cheeky. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard because like obviously when I use dark wave and stuff a lot, if anything, just for the fact that it, in this world of like pegging stuff, like it's just probably arguably the most sort of self-descriptive, but even it just kind of, it's like a blanket term, right? So
but it's inclassifiable. And that's what I like about the idea of one considering themselves dark wave. And like Lycia constantly comes up because A, I love them, and B, they were like inarguably one of the best to ever do it. But they were even if you were to call them dark wave and then listen to them, like they're not really dark wave. They're really like bleak.
No, it's such a broad genre, even in that self. It's like synthwave kind of connotates. I sometimes use that, but it connotates this sort of like that in itself is an actual genre now. Which a lot of like those neon kind of grids and shit like that.
Yeah.
Like with like palm trees, like much like sort of like an early '90s Super Nintendo racing game or something.
Yeah,
but
like Excite Bike in here. What's going on?
I sometimes use like electronic post punk because I played punk. This is post that. It's electronic.
Yeah. If you were to talk to Mike from Lycia and tell him what do you consider yourself, it's punk. It's still just punk to him. It's still just punk to these people.
Yeah, and it's just like obviously it's obviously like that's their influence, really. Like
the
same energy there maybe when they were younger, right? Probably playing more punk style music. They're still applying that, but just being more adventurous and trying new things. So yeah, I can totally see how that works. But obviously from a quote unquote marketing point of view.
Because everyone needs to be didactic. But in truth, all of us who were influenced by everything from the Clash and the Sex Pistols to Black Flag to Gorilla Biscuits, we are still, be it hardcore, be it traditional, it's all still punk.
Oh yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you there. Like I still, as I said, touched on this interview before, when I'm doing the music I do now, I'm still very informed by like this long sort of comet tail that comes from that whole scene I was involved in the 90s. Like some of that aesthetic and decisions about how I write stuff are informed by that genre, even though like I've been, especially since I moved to the UK, I've been relatively detached to it for quite a while in terms of like participating in it, I suppose.
Yeah. But you're never going to not be a punk, is my point.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm never going to not be a punk. What we do, like, this is a podcast, but this is still a fucking fans.
Guys,
it's still
I'm
a
no longer
fanzine.
punk. I got hedge funds and a Range Rover and a yacht. So see you later.
The truth of the matter, though, is it's all still punk rock. You can call it post-punk, it's still punk. You could call it goth, it's still punk, because Christian Death was still just a fucking LA hardcore band.
First, Only Theater of Pain. That's a pretty punk sounding record.
Look at who played on it. You know what I mean? Like members of the Adolescents were on that record.
Yeah.
It's a fucking punk record.
Yeah.
No matter what it sounds like, it's the spirit in which it was completed and executed. Punk rock. The way you still do things, no matter how it sounds, no matter how pop one could construe it as, and it's not pop in my eyes. It's still great rock-based electronic music. It's punk. Yeah. It's fucking punk.
Punk, post-punk, whatever. It's just like, that kind of applies. I'm still, as I said, I still thinking it's coming from a hardcore punk place. So
yeah, very much so. The VSS a hardcore band? Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And they were just like trying something new with it, right?
Yeah. So how are you not a hardcore band?
Yeah.
You are.
Exactly. You are.
Of course you are.
Yeah.
Of course you are. We will never.
Don't deny it. You're a hardcore band.
That's it. You're not a metal band. You're a hardcore band. And that's beautiful. And I love that about what we all continue to give to the scene that had given us so much. And as long as we feed that, it will continue to pay dividends and feed us.
And then the younger kids will get to have their own version of punk. It might be a different group of bands and a different structure, but then they'll go off and continue their adventure with music as well. So yeah.
And I will always, and I promise this, be a cheerleader for that, even if I don't like the way it sounds, but somehow I still do.
Yeah, there's a lot of music I listen to where if I'm in the right mood, or if I'm looking for certain things rather than just pure ecstatic enjoyment, I'll find something interesting even in bands I don't say I really like. But they've got a great drummer, like things like that.
I mean, if Gorilla Biscuits are as great as I always felt they were, as a punk band, I still think Skinny Puppy is just as punk. I still think Killing Joke is obviously just as punk. I still think Slayer is just as punk. There are threads that stitch these things together that make them, as disparate as they may sound in comparison, familial.
Of course. And common thread running through all of them, right? So
yes, and what you do is no different. And I think it's a credit to what you do that you don't just throw shit at a wall. It has intention. It has intention, and it's still tuneful in its almost chaotic nature. It's not contrived. It's well crafted, well written, well executed, and I have loved it from when it first happened until now.
Thank you.
It's
I don't know what to say.
it, I almost feel like I'm cheating on your early records to say this, but this is the best you've ever been.
Okay, well that's good. As I said, it was the one I didn't even like when I first heard it, so that's encouraging.
You know something? Sometimes the songs that you don't like are the ones that, upon further listening, become your favorites.
Oh yeah, no, that changes all the time. There's some things that I'll reevaluate that I've done. I was like, that's actually pretty good, or even might be that actually had potential, but I did this thing wrong with it. You know,
Right?
because I look back at what I did for more about informing about how to go forward without referencing what I did in the past, if that makes sense.
Oh, of course, it makes sense. But I'm a musician, so
yeah. Exactly.
If you were to leave my listening audience with anything tonight to kind of give them a signpost as to what your journey's been in this thing, in this scene, in this endeavor, in creating music, what would it be?
It's always, I think it's about, for me, the journey has been about meeting new people that kind of provide ideas for your lives, expanding your boundaries and listening to things and finding connectivity between them. Obviously, for me, it's like a lot of it's been like different media as well, like bringing in stuff to the music that's not necessarily just music. That's been very important for me. Like, this might be a feeling or an interaction you had with somebody that may be inspired. So I just bring everything into the table and just don't be afraid to try new stuff based on new sort of sources of inspiration. That's maybe what I could sum up in a nutshell at this time. You know, as I'm saying this, kind of going through this like super hyper frame flashback of everything I've done, but those are like some key touch points, right?
And to kind of like sum up those key touch points, having made a life that is ensconced, is completely like transposed by the arts. Everything you do is informed by artistic impulse. Yeah. How do you continue to bring something new in kind of like parlance to that? Because everything that you do,
I think,
is artistic.
For me, it's like doing video, graphic design, music. I think it's always just having an interest in observing things.
Because even like you even do your music like videos, really?
Yeah, I do all my own music videos, and I sometimes do videos with a friend of mine here. She does a lot of analog video synthesis, and we do videos for other bands. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that band. She passed away.
You're very familiar.
Very familiar. For them, like one was like a Boy Harsher remix, and the other was a Soft Moon remix. So that just kind of like is like exercising. Obviously, because I'm a film buff, that kind of stuff interests me. So it's just like, and then I take stuff I learned from Matt and go, this might work musically, or so like you're trying all these different trades and they kind of influence each other. How you like even doing like artwork, you're like somehow those techniques might apply to producing music or even cooking dinner. Stuff completely more like what people would consider more mundane endeavors, I guess. So,
well, the beauty's in the devil's in the details, but the beauty's there too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm not trying to drag this out, but I'm having a blast with you. As a film lover, film buff, I too am in that boat, and I'm a massive giallo and Italian horror aficionado.
Mm-hmm.
Who's your favorite Italian horror director?
Probably, obviously, like probably Argento. I mean, Profondo Rosso's or Deep Red is
Deep Red, yeah.
I mean, that's probably one of my favorites because I went through a phase about a year or so ago where I was like bulk watching all this giallo as well as like Italian crime thrillers from that maybe slightly different of that same period. And there's a few like little other blips, like the Perfume of the Lady in Black is pretty interesting. That was a weird one.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there's a lot of that one. Just kind of goes down a weird sort of like psychedelic wormhole.
Well, I mean, and the reason why I ask is, it's for me, it's always Argento and Fulci, because Fulci is an absurdist and is really visceral and
Oh yeah, sure,
brutal in a way that Argento tried to be, but he was always more Disney oriented with his color palette and making things very colorful and very spectacle, whereas Fulci was very grimy and apocalyptic. But Argento followed in the footsteps of a band that you and I both reference and love, which is Tangerine Dream. He had, like, even with the soundtracks by Goblin, were very, very prog oriented, very beyond psychedelic, more cerebral, more like legitimate LSD trips, and not not in a Grateful Dead way, but in a like I accidentally took speed along with this tab of acid, and it made it go very dark. I think that
they're in for the ride there.
I think the hallmark of a creative also is someone who can allow themselves to take a journey like, something like Suspiria or Profondo Rosso, and allow it to affect you and not try to pick it apart more.
Yeah, sometimes
take the ride.
I pick apart a film, but in a really weird angle. Like a lot of things I like to do is make comparisons between two films that might seem on the surface unrelated. I do some writings on my website about film once in a while. Honestly, I haven't done it for a while because I think my problem is I've watched so many films now, like trying to go back and like, which one should I write about next? I'm like, fucking hell, I don't even know. There's like hundreds of them, but maybe it's like more of a winter project. I'll get back into it. But I've done, sometimes I'll observe a film and how it connects to like this different topic. So I might feel more inspired to write about something if I have a different angle that hasn't really been written about before, if that makes sense.
No, yeah.
Like I did this write up on that film The Keep.
Oh, very, very familiar.
I did this one that was kind of like how it was tying in with like at the about early 2010s with bands. I don't know if you're familiar with these bands like Gatekeeper.
Oh, very, yeah.
White Car, like this sort of like Tumblr sort of aesthetic, and like bands that were kind of referencing these sort of 80s horror films at the time. So I kind of did a little write up about that because I really like that film, although it's insanely flawed.
It's insanely flawed, but conceptually, it's actually very terrifying.
It's terrifying, and I think one of the reasons it was flawed because it was hacked to death by the studio, because I think the original cut was like 3 hours, and I think the second reason was that the sort of the secret weapon of the production crew, the special effects guy, died like 2 weeks into production. Like, well, I don't know how I was gonna do that shit. So they just they kind of had. I think they might have either had to get someone that wasn't on board with the same vision, or just use whatever scraps on the floor. I mean, when you watch the film, like there's some weird, awkward plot cuts and stuff.
Yeah,
for those two reasons, but it's still like very atmospheric, and I think it's probably one of my favorite Tangerine Dream soundtracks for sure.
Yeah. I mean, when you consider everything that they'd done, that was definitely one of the darker turns they'd taken. even though they were involved.
I think it's funny as we're talking about this how they did risky business with.
Yeah, but then like they took their turns with like David Lynch's Dune, and oh god, what Argento film did they work on?
I'm not really sure. I mean, like it's kind of weird. Obviously, they did stuff for Legend. This kind of funny.
Yeah, Legend. Yep.
Legend, like, is one of the few cases where the American soundtrack is more artsy than the European one. Because I remember I was watching it here years ago at a friend's house, and I was like, I've seen it tons of times. It's kind of fluffy movie or whatever, but I watched it. It's like there's something fucked with this version. And then I realized it was the score was completely more standard or orchestral score.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the European version, but the American version had Tangerine Dream soundtrack. And I think the last song on the Legend, the American version Legend, is John Anderson from Yes with Tangerine Dream, I think. And then the European version has a Brian Ferry track at the end.
Yeah, which I'm not going to shit on Brian Ferry because...
No, I'm not going to shit on Brian Ferry. I'm just like comparing the fact that they're very different.
Vastly.
And I'm wondering why they did that. I wonder if it was like a licensing thing or if...
I think it had to do with Brian Ferry's popularity at the time in Europe too.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You know,
I think both tracks at the end of the film are quite suiting, but it's just interesting how like the American soundtrack went for this more synthy Tangerine Dream score. I mean, they were doing a lot of American movies at the time.
Yeah, and they completely did their own thing on every single solitary one. I always defend Tangerine Dream as being like this stroke of genius.
Mm-hmm.
Although some of their own work... some of it I really like, and some of it is just...
I mean, I think that's natural for artists.
Sure.
I had a conversation with someone who was like, I kind of like bands that have hit or misses too, or like or at least where the records that have a different color to them.
Yeah, very much.
Oh, so. All the records are great except for that one's kind of weird, and then the other person will be like, I actually really like that record, but I think that record's fucking dumb. You know what I mean? Like. You know what I mean? Like it's. I think it's great when like, you know, or bands might take a misstep. You get it a bit less now because I think bands maybe tend to stick to their genre more for the sake of retaining an audience that takes a long time to get anyway.
Yeah.
But back in the day when like some guy with a cigar chomping record exec was just like, here's $200,000, go make a record. Like, guys, I bought a sitar and a timpani. Let's go try this out in the next record, you know. So yeah, but even now I think there's bands, not to say that bands don't take those weird shifts anymore. I think there's plenty of newer bands that are probably like, this record we did something totally different. But it's always interesting when a band continues and they have what one person might see is like, these three records are great. This one's terrible, you know, but then that was great. But then someone else has a different viewpoint entirely.
Yeah. And you never see that when you consider stuff that becomes canon, right? Mm-hmm. Like true canon. In our scene specifically, Agnostic Front only had one record that stepped out of its lane, and that's only because it became more oi punk because they were on Epitaph Records under Lars from Rancid, and they tried to make an oi record, and people kind of liked it, but it wasn't really like where's one voice, you know. It's when it gets kind of hippie where it really makes for conversation almost, in my opinion, you know. The psychedelic stuff
will always like divide an audience where like maybe from bands from the first generation of punk, they put out one or two records that are more punk. And then they do a few records after that where they try to branch out to be more experimental and
Sandinista.
Fuck with the tempos. Yeah, exactly. There's an example, or even like what was that? that band Die Kreuzen.
Die Kreuzen, yeah, they
like
went from
first
being very
record,
heavy.
That like super like really fast, and then they kind of got even like later records were like, you know, kind of more in tune with maybe like the 80s alternative guitar bands in the UK at the time, you know, and you know, maybe a bit of acoustic in there once in a while, you know, like, so, you know, like that's like a classic trope of, you know, the band starts out punk, starts getting a little branching their wings a bit, and that will always divide some people. Like, oh no, I like their punk era, I like their, like, you know, their goth era or whatever, you know.
Yeah, the Damned, there's a great example.
Oh yeah, Damned, great example for sure, yeah.
But like there's always the other example of like SSD.
Yeah. I'm not as familiar with their stuff, but I think like,
but they were like the Bostonian like straight edge band, you know.
yeah.
And then they go into their like skate rock metal thrash era and completely alienate everyone. And when you listen to A and B, they're really both fucking awesome at what they're doing, but they're so dissimilar. It always struck me that people are never, that they never just take the ride and say, okay, they're both good, but one's acceptable to my circle and one's not.
These things might change with someone's taste in music too. Like, I know I've definitely evolved and am still keep evolving. Like, my taste is broadened, not because I didn't like, some of it's because I didn't appreciate it when I was younger, but some of it's just because like I haven't actually gotten around to listening to it yet. And then you discover that, wow, this is fucking amazing. You know, like, why didn't I know? Like, I have like I have a secret love for a lot of like that sort of 80s electro funk.
I love that shit. I
like,
love that
like
shit.
The System and like all those Parliament side projects, and
oh yeah,
you gotta go down the rabbit hole like Zapp and Roger and stuff like that. Like, I kind of really got into those because you could tell all those people in those bands were like just actually, this was like before MIDI, so those crazy kind of bass lines, that was all done by hand and stuff, and it's like, wow, that's so crazy. And like there's a lot of weird sophistication going in that music that maybe synth pop, like especially from the UK at that time, didn't really touch on. Like, there's a lot of like more interesting grooves going on.
That's what I really loved about people, even though Africa Bambaataa is a pretty divisive character when you consider what he's been accused of sexually.
Yeah.
But musically, you're talking about a person that was involved with the writing of the Blue Oyster Cult's Godzilla.
I didn't know that fact.
Yes.
He learns something new every day.
Africa Bambaataa is, and like he's at, you know, part one of hip hop. He really is like a big part of that. And what did he sample? The album Autobahn.
That does not surprise me. I think a lot of those early hip hop guys were totally into a lot of that stuff, like Kraftwerk and sort of electronic stuff going on at the time. It seems to me that seems like a total natural progression, really.
But to take into consideration someone who's that renaissance with music, and to not be accepting of something that goes completely off the map, to me, it informs me that you're tone deaf or just lost. I don't know.
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. Yeah, but like, I mean, there's like, there's just, I think even now, like, there's like, going back in time in the conversation, that book, you know, with Stupid about Cranky Records, I've actually been kind of reevaluating some stuff I kind of passed at the time, not because I didn't like it, it's just because I was busy listening to other stuff, like even about like Tortoise or something.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, maybe at the time I thought it was a bit clinical for my taste, because I would have been, what, like 19, 20? But then you realize that they're just really good musicians because they're all swapping around all the time. And, you know, they're obviously a bunch of people, friends that were like, let's just make some cool music, and, you know, I'll play drums in this song and you play bass in this song, and, you know, It's kind of interesting. And like reading that book, like how everybody just kind of participated in each other's recordings or whatever. It's kind of a nice little community vibe going on there. So yeah, I just like, and like a lot of stuff I might discover new music because I pick one musician, and I do this with acting talent too, where I was like, oh, this person, let's say someone like Susanna York, like what other movies has she been in? And then you start finding all these weird ones. Like that's how I found, like, I guess that film Images by Robert Altman.
Oh God.
That's a weird one.
Yeah, but
I
you're
love
going
the soundtrack for that. It's done by John Williams, who did obviously Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah.
But his soundtrack, it's like really like bowed metal and just like weird clinky metallic sounds. It's really strange soundtrack. And just the film itself is like really bizarre.
It's fun though, like when you consider people like that. I always go back to Morricone because to me, no one could kind of like transmute between the spaghetti western to like a giallo horror quite as easily and with the dexterity that he did, and still make it very impactful and you know, almost like the film could not have possibly done without this score. You know, I think more
iconic, definitely. I think like, I mean, there was obviously other composers in that time, but he definitely put a sort of a very heavy-handed output with a lot of that soundtracks that came out at the time, and I was just impressed. Like, you know, you look at like the discography, and it's like, man, you're just like film after film after film. I mean, there's obviously probably newer sort of musicians that are doing soundtracks, but I think it would be a lot harder nowadays to get the opportunity to like, hey kid, do you want to do 30 films? You know, like, I think it's also just because there's probably like so many more musicians nowadays that have an interest in doing soundtracks. So there's like, it's not going to be one particular or one small group of musicians monopolizing like the sort of the landscape for, especially when it comes to independent films or whatever, because there's always so much talent to choose from, really. So,
but imagine the bandwidth to cover that vast of a swath of territory, you know, and to kind of like tie it back into you and sort of like maybe wrap it up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think you always had scope in so much as the change in Soft Riot from stem to stern.
Yeah.
The sound changed dramatically.
No, I've noticed that, and like,
but it stayed like the spirit was.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There, the same.
Like a lot of people that would have seen me like 10 years ago, and they'll see me, people are like, you're like a completely different thing now. It's like, well, that's called evolution.
Yeah, that's called.
If that didn't happen, maybe bashing rocks in caves and trying to make a fire unsuccessfully. So,
well, that's a testament to human maturation. That's what we're supposed to do: is evolve, become the angels of our better nature, for lack of a better term. And you've done it with an aplomb and a dexterity and a almost virtuosity that very few artists that come to mind have made such a massive shift so perfectly and so effortlessly in sound that it's actually sort of incredible to me, and it's been a fun ride for me as a listener.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you're picking up in it, because, like, I mean, like, obviously, for me, it's like a lot of effort and sort of consideration is put into the music. Like, I'm not someone that, I mean, I can get finicky about sounds, but I'm not going to go all Chinese democracy in any of my records.
And that's kind of my point.
Yeah, I know when to stop. Like I'm like, that's enough. I kind of gotten to where I need to go with that, and it's close enough for me, right? So
the progression is so obvious, not unnatural, not shark jumping at any point. As to be Fonzie, but it really gets incremental in a way. Like we're at point A, and the shift happens very naturally over this short period of time. But then we get to B, C, D, and
some records shift more than others. But that's just like
that's human.
Exactly.
So you go from this being point Z to the beginning being point A. If you take the journey in chronology, it really is a tactile progression in songwriting, and that is so much fun as a listener and a fan that I really, that if there was any point like really prescient point to this conversation, it was to sort of applaud you for how far you've taken this in a decade.
Yeah, I know. I'm like surprised myself. Like when you're writing out the press release, the record, like the 10th album, I'm like, really? Am I fucking Led Zeppelin? You know what I mean? Like, I'm just making that statement just because, like, any project, I mean, obviously it's a lot easier to do when you're a solo artist, but prior to that, like any bands I was in would maybe release like 3 or 4 records. So it's kind of an interesting place to be in too, where you're at 10 records and you're still thinking about going the next one. It's a first for me, and I've been doing it for this long. So I'm, as I said before, I'm just happy I still have ideas, and some people are listening, and then I'm still excited about new ideas. So that's like half the battle right there, really.
And for you to be able to, say that I'm excited about this next thing, and I'm already ready for this next thing. God, who's really saying that right now? Who's out there being that active and releasing at such a vast clip?
Well, I don't think it's going to come out. It'll take a while, but just the fact that I know where it's going is like paints a nice sort of path to the next direction, I guess.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I think with that, I will, because we've been at it for 3 hours.
Yeah, I know.
This has been an effortless, very fun, and very inspiring.
Super fun conversation. And as I said, especially since I was going into, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, but like, I find you really natural to talk to. We have a lot of talking points, and it was just, as I said, organically just took its direction. So
yeah. And as a credit to you, I never go into these conversations with an agenda. Okay. I feel people out to see who they are and if I have chemistry with them.
Seriously, I thank you so much. And obviously Tim at Sweet Cheetah for making the connection. And it was actually really interesting knowing that you'd actually seen me play before a long time in Vancouver, nonetheless. So.
In Vancouver on a pilgrimage north to have seen you. But when the next record is ready to come, will you come back and kind of do this again and go down another rabbit hole with me?
Oh yeah, totally up for that. No, this was like totally like organic conversation and went so many interesting, insightful directions. I had a great time.
Yeah, me too, man. And I'm glad we got to meet like this, and I can't wait to do it again.
Okay. Thank you so much, Peter. It's been a really good time, and I'm gonna conclude with a light beverage and then probably lay my head down and let you get on with the rest of your... What time is it there? It's like 11:30, I'm guessing?
11:30, yeah.
Well, I guess you don't have much of your day left, but allow you to conclude your evening as well, I guess. So.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We'll talk soon.
Please do.
Ciao for now.
Ciao Bye. For now, my friend. Bye-bye.
And there you have it, my friends. My discussion with Jack, part 2. We had an incredibly fun time, as you'd heard. We're going to do it again when the next record is ready to come down the pike. I look forward to that. I look forward to holding the record in my hand, which I should be doing very soon. So next week will be the 100th episode. We will have Mike Antera from Lycia, respectively. We will have Mike performing live just for us. We will have so many silly, wonderful, incredible things for you. I can't believe it's been 100 episodes. I am over the moon. And it's all because of you all. So I thank you for that. I thank Jack. I thank Tim. I have so many people that I'm going to list next week that were instrumental in the building of this show. Michael Malarkey, Damian Moyal, so many wonderful people. But we'll get into that in 1 week's time. Until then, he's been Jack of Soft Riot. I've been Peter. You've been beautiful. And this has been the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. I love you all. Be well. And listen to Soft Riot. No. Good night.